climate action, and Florian Reyda is speaking on SDG 15, life on land. So thank you to all of our presenters. And wanted to just talk a little bit about the SDGs in case some people are a little more unfamiliar. There is a video, but I know that we had some issues with the sound before. Let's see. I'm going to try clicking on this. Can folks hear that?
Yes.
All right, so that was just a little video kind of giving an overview of the SDGs. But essentially the SDGs are a call to action by all countries in global partnership to promote prosperity while protecting the environment. And they're essentially a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future for all and to address the global challenges that we face, including poverty, inequality, climate change, environmental degradation, peace, and justice. So that, in a nutshell, are the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So I also just want to note that this series came out of the SDG Awareness Committee, which consists of myself, Rachel Kornhauser, Office of Sustainability, MC Montoya for Foreign Languages and Literatures, Rebecca Harrington, Office of Health Education, and Chilton Reynolds, Teaching, Learning, and Technology, and the COIL coordinator. So moving forward, we'll give our presenters around 10 minutes to speak about their topics and to answer the questions that are shown on the screen right now. So essentially how you became passionate about the topic, what about this topic do you think everyone should know? How do they intersect with any of the other SDGs? And what's something that we can do to get involved? Just talking about work in the classroom and outside of the classroom about these SDGs. So we will start with Rebecca Harrington talking about student engagement.
So I have kind of a different tack because I'm kind of approaching all of these things at once, but I do see where so many of, even though like there's an SDG that addresses health inequities, really all of the SDGs impact our wellness in some way, shape, or form, whether that's through pollution in the environment or through access to healthcare or any of those other intersections. So when we start to think about how do we achieve wellness, how do we support people on a mission of achieving wellness, we have to look at all of these. And I've been using the SDGs in conversations with students all of this year. And the way I describe it to students is it's, we tend to look at these as these singular dumpster fires, but we really could look at it as a 17-sided dumpster fire. It's all connected. You can only do so much work in one area before you also have to address the issues in the other area. And so I've been using the SDGs as a framework to revision what was the Action Hero program many years on campus. So some of you might have been in receipt of some of these t-shirts that said Action Hero on the front, and they had some very strong verbiage on the back about, you know, I'm ready to combat racism and challenges. And of that space, and how do we move that forward as we start to look at, you know, like hero maybe isn't the best word to use as we revision things with an anti-racism lens. So using the SDGs as a framework for moving forward, I think really benefits our campus, which is super small. We really can't do things working alone. It benefits us to identify partners and spaces. And so moving forward, you know, what's my usual approach is starting to increase the language and the understanding and the awareness. So I have a team of students, interns this semester. Well, they've actually been working all year on this. So we have a little bit of a social media presence, and I'll drop our Instagram and our Facebook handle in the chat so you can follow us. But we're just taking advantage right now of kind of the Instagram swipe right. So it's like a little mini PowerPoint. So we're educating folks about what the SDGs are, and slowly, you know, hopefully getting some speed so that when we start to return to a more regularly scheduled campus experience over the next year or two, that we have built the capacity to help students understand what their point into the system is and start to help students identify who are the other student groups that they want to work with, and really long term where we hope to take this program, which we're at this point calling Take Action Oneana, from a prevention lens, but also having some response. So how can we design a program that will now have a nimble approach to multiple issues that affect our wellness on campus, that, you know, policy is a response over time that the college can say, yes, this is something that's important to us and we want to address it in this certain way, but there's always going to be gaps in policy as we identify new things. So how can we design a program going forward that can kind of be that stopgap, have a nimble response team, folks that are identified as being experts in certain areas that can guide us and facilitate us through that, having a network of folks identified who can come together and troubleshoot quickly. We do a lot of restorative justice through the Office of Community Standards, but a lot of times that is just the two people who might be involved in an incident. So say that there is a situation where an anti-Jewish symbol is drawn on a whiteboard in a residence hall. Well, it's often just the student whose whiteboard it is and the student whose pen drew that symbol. So there's a ripple effect on campus, and a lot of people are affected. So then how would we work to support the Jewish community to identify what the needs are in that moment of support and understanding, but then what was missing perhaps in policy and procedure in the larger campus system to have a better response in the future. So looking to engage students to identify that they can change their community, they can change their culture. I think we do an excellent job of empowering students to speak up on campus, but I want to ensure that we're also teaching students how to speak up once they leave our campus. That it's a really different power dynamic when you're the newest hire in a company and identifying inequity and wanting to stand up and speak up about that. So how are we going to give our students those skills as well? And then I think finally, it's how do we identify ongoing education for students so that we can say, hey, you've already got some really great skills in this gender and equity space, but you can bolster those skills by learning a little bit more about this space and looking at how those places have some interplay. So that's where we're at this point. That's kind of my piece. Is I am trying to, you know, do some education in a broader way. It's definitely been a more difficult year to do that in, but we are building some infrastructure to move forward with as kind of the gears get rolling over the next couple semesters. So that's what I had to share. I'm going to share our Facebook and our Instagram. So if you'd like to follow those, encourage your students to follow those. We definitely will be looking for people who want to play along with us in that space. So if you have information you want to share and broadcast out in those places, let us know and we'll do some signal boosting for you all.
Thanks, Rebecca. And on that note, also, we are hoping to do a similar series to this, more focused towards students next semester. So hopefully we can engage some students that way as well. So next, speaking next would be Barbara Durkin. If you want to introduce yourself and touch on the questions.
Thank you, Denise. Welcome, everybody. This is an exciting opportunity. This is, when Earth Day first came and occurred so many decades now ago, I don't think anybody thought about sustainability beyond the concept of just environment, clean air, clean water, and clearly the work of the United Nations with the Sustainable Development Goals. Boy, that's a lot, isn't it? Mouthwise. We're going to just call them SDGs now. Is so much more expansive. So I want to share some things with you. My research, my background is interdisciplinary. I was a human resource director. I have a degree in law. I write on policy, but I have an undergraduate degree in political science. But my areas of interest have really expanded over the past few years, and I think it shows how broad this whole concept of SDGs has become. So if you'll be patient with me in terms of some of my notes. So my research is interdisciplinary. I started out really when I was in law school. I wrote an article on the international labor standards, and I've since, when I was on sabbatical, did some work with the International Labor Organization. So much of my work focuses on SDG 8, which is on decent work and economic growth. And I know that Dr. Siriani spoke on that earlier. But my concept is that my work on the international labor standards then expanded into the idea of, so what happens with technology in the workplace? And then what's the future of work? So that's really where the tapestry, if you will, of my work comes together. So, excuse me, I think it's important to, and so my work with Dr. Isabella Lakshina, who's the chair of Management Marketing Information Systems, and Dr. Kees Lanting, who's he's in Belgium. He's been on the European Commission on Technology. We've worked together now for almost a decade on working on business models and the use of technology, specifically the Internet of Things and also big data. And I just want to have some definitions out. First of all, SDG 9 really talks about investments in infrastructure, transport, irrigation, energy, and information and technology. And that last bit is really where I focused. That they note that it's crucial to achieving sustainable development and empowering communities in empowering many communities. And it's been recognized that growth in productivity and incomes and improvement in health and education outcomes require investment in infrastructure. So the Internet of Things is really a simple definition, if you'll allow me, is the interconnection via the internet of computing devices that are embedded in everyday objects, enabling them to send and receive data. So some of the examples of that might be some of the smart surveillance. If you think about Ring, if you think about automated transportation, smarter energy management systems, water distribution, urban security, environmental monitoring. So you can see how this expands into the other SDGs. Our research has discussed how sensors in particular can be used in different ways. One of the things that I like to share with my students is the idea of people analytics. And there's a company called Humanize, and they have a sensor device that's no bigger than my cell phone that will look at how close are you standing next to someone, what's your tone of voice. Theoretically, it doesn't process the words, but we all know that's not probably true. And it takes all that data, all those pieces, compares it to other things that happen in other companies and in their own companies, and then says, how likely are you to make quota? So using sensors to predict employee performance is of particular concern to me. You might have been at one of the student research and creativity days where one of my students actually did research on privacy in the workplace on it. Certainly in the area of agriculture, where you run a vineyard, you run a farm, and you're able to take the information that comes from the plant, from the sensors. What's the temperature of the soil? Think about right now if you wanted to put something in your yard. What's the temperature of the soil? how much water is there around that plant? What's the weather tend to be like in Oneonta on April 9th? Is it likely to snow? Is it likely to rain? Is it likely to freeze? And then to compare it with other data so that agriculture can be used to enhance the environment, right? So some of that testing data. So you're probably familiar with some of that first generation consumer products, the smart home, certainly the Fitbit as a wearable, although we know that wearables have expanded and from my perspective, that has tremendous impact on the workplace. Certainly our smartphones. I'm sure that my colleagues will discuss smart cities, but I will tell you that Barcelona, for example, has a way of having sensors so that you don't go around in circles to find parking spaces, and certainly the idea of smart cars. As we've gone through the COVID-19 pandemic, and a lot of the research that the UN has refers back now to the pandemic, we begin to see that the smart technology can be used effectively and efficiently. So Dr. Lakshina and I have presented in the past, we presented in Ghent, Belgium 2 years ago on the use of telehealth, the use of sensors in telehealth. And certainly one of my friends had some heart issues, and the fact that they could monitor her from home to see, using the sensors on her body to see what the status of her heart condition was. So I think one of the questions that you asked is, how did you become passionate about this topic? Well, besides my interest in law and employee relations, one of the exciting things that I have to share is I went to the Eurosis conference in Ghent, Belgium in 2019, and it was awesome to see the future. We saw smart refrigerators that then talked to smart scales that then weighed food and said to a patient, you're diabetic, this food has X amount of carbs in it, you need to be conscious of it. So that interlinking. We went to an actual house that's in conjunction with the university at Ghent, where the entire smart house is there. And one of the interesting things, it was amazing. Everything was all interconnected. But one of the fascinating things for me was there was a washer dryer, and it would take data and know that, oh, today is a hazy day, probably not a good day to do your wash because the solar panels aren't going to work. So and so we can see how all this technology is really tied in together. Technology has implications for small businesses so they can operate more efficiently. So that energy use, the use of thermostats, air quality monitors, lighting, companies in service industries. One of the things that we've come across is there's a company named Smartbelly, and they have garbage trash cans, particularly in Philadelphia, where they did it as a test. So they have smart cans. So the can tells the municipality, okay, come and pick up this garbage out of it. There's now enough garbage. So we can see that there's a better way of doing things. It didn't quite work out because you had to physically touch something as the person putting away your garbage. And so now they're going to make a change to it so that there'll be a foot pedal. But other than that, it was a success, although it was costly to implement. So one of the challenges that organizations are facing, municipalities, countries, companies, is the cost of how much it is. But the benefits outweigh it. So if we look at medicine, for example, there's that correlation of sensors and big data. We can see how we can improve the care of people. We can change the length of stays, so that we can see that there's a lot of implications. I just want to share with you some of the things that the UN organization is say and issued on sustainable development. That the idea of innovation, infrastructure, and industrialization that's inclusive meaning global, involving countries that are least developed as well as the highly developed, sustainable, leads to economic forces that generate employment and income. They promote new technology, facilitate international trade, and enable the efficient use of resources. So one of the challenges is to, yes, please, so one of the challenges is to accelerate the development, for example, of manufacturing in least developed countries. How can we use this technology to really push it forward? Even before the pandemic, we saw that that it was disrupting manufacturing industries. And so we need to find lasting solutions to challenges, particularly those that are related to resources and energy. Part of the issue that comes forward with the UN directives is that whole idea of who's going to pay for research and development. And so part of the argument has been that there has to be more invested as a proportion of governmental governmental spending. Sorry. In terms of communication for infrastructure, which is something Dr. Lascell and Dr. Lanting and I have worked on, it's really shocking that more than half of the population is now online, and almost the entire world population lives in an area covered by a mobile network. But I'll cite the stats later. So many people just don't have physical access to it. And so we need to develop that infrastructure. The Asian Development Bank noted that it's critical, particularly in the Pacific region, to have that kind of infrastructure so that they're resilient to climate disasters and climate change. But they estimate that just in Asia alone, it'll require an investment of $434 billion a year. And so we see that that's a real problem. Excuse me. Information and communication technologies have been on the frontier of the COVID-19 response. The crisis accelerated digitalization of many businesses and services. So we see a lot of work from home, a lot of telework, a lot of video conferencing. But don't forget that not everyone has access to that. Not everyone in this country has access. We tend to think of all these things as being overseas. But if you look at how long it's taken for us to have broadband access in rural areas, where we have that digital divide, even that digital divide in urban cities, it clearly has an impact on how we can provide innovation and how we can provide some decent work for people. So we need to bridge the digital divide for the 3.6 billion people who are offline. The 2020 Financing for Sustainable Development report said that we have to harness the potentials of those technologies. I'm not used to giving this much talk. I'm really not. This is not the way I work, but I want to shock you with some facts and figures. And this is from the UN area on developmental programs. 2.3 billion people lack access to basic sanitation. In some low-income African countries, infrastructure constraints cut business productivity by 40%. 2.6 billion people in developing countries do not have access to constant electricity. More than 40 billion people still do not have access to the internet. 90% of them are in the developing world. The renewable energy sectors currently employ more than 2.3 million people. That number could total 20 million by 2030. And in developing countries, barely 30% of agricultural products undergo industrial processing, compared to 98% in high-income countries. So I think what really stuns me is how does this really have an impact when we talk about companies? So my work really is that one of the last questions was, what's the interconnection? And there's such a strong interconnection between SDG 8, which is decent work and economic growth, and SDG 9, which is industry, innovation, and infrastructure. How will the use of technology affect the workplace? So while my research focused on the implementation of the international labor standards, we need to see that automation, digitization is going to change the nature of jobs. And so we have something that they've even coined the phrase digital Taylorism. Frederick Taylor had time and motion studies, and now what we're seeing companies is using technology to time how long it takes for an employee to do something. And we all know the companies, I don't need to mention who they are, who have been called on the carpet for using that kind of time and motion and using technology. My last points are the World Bank report in 2019 noted that in the changing nature of work in the face of technological changes and fears, is that automation will replace employees with machines. Not all the research indicates that that's the truth, but the jobs of the future will require investments in people. So what can you do is the bottom line. Well, I think we need to be cognizant of the digital divide, both in this country, in rural areas, in urban areas. We see it in our own classrooms, the students who have access to Wi-Fi, the students who have challenging accesses, whether they live in an urban area or a rural area. I think we need to be cognizant of where our products are coming from. I could share horror stories based on SDG 8 of how companies are not living up to the international labor standards. And finally, where are companies investing their money? Where are you investing your money? And so I'm cognizant of time. I hope I didn't go over my 10 minutes. And I thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara. So we're going to go to our next presenter, Farzaneh Soflaei, for SDG 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities.
Thank you very much for your introduction, Dennis. Can you hear me very well?
Yes.
I have 3 monitors here and sometimes I confuse. So, okay. Hi everyone, my name is Farzaneh Soflaei, and as a visiting assistant professor, I teach some interdisciplinary online courses on sustainable design in Department of Geography and Environmental Sustainability. With an emphasis on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, these interdisciplinary courses are designed to equip the students and professionals with a toolkit to prepare them for industry-specific credential exams such as LEED Green Associate, LEED AP, Passive House, and Green Roof Professional, offering them practical knowledge and skills required for the sustainability job market, in which the demand for green building professionals is the fastest sector in the country right now. Sustainability has always been my key research, teaching, and design interest. And throughout my career, I have explored different aspects of this multidimensional issue in a wide range of housing, building, and urban scale projects. In my PhD research in architecture, with a focus on the environmental aspect of sustainability, I explored the impact of courtyards as passive cooling and heating design strategies on improving indoor thermal comfort and reducing costs and consumption in sustainable energy efficient buildings. On the other hand, my dissertation in urban design was carried out on the role of public open spaces as urban infrastructure and potential venues for democratic participation and interactions in urban social sustainability. Here, I focus on the social aspect of sustainability in the urban context. Since 2004, I have actively worked in this specific field and published more than 45 articles in conference proceedings and scientific journals, such as Renewable and Sustainable Energy Review, Energy and Buildings, and so on. In addition to research, I have also developed and taught more than 25 courses on green architecture, sustainable urban design, planning, and environmental sustainability in diverse academic environments. As an architect and urban designer, I would like to highlight the impact of buildings on climate change as the most challenging environmental issue of our time to address the Sustainable Development Goal 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities. Studies have shown that buildings, beside the transportation, are the largest contributor to the climate change. About 36% of global energy is used in buildings, and they are responsible for 39% of energy-related carbon dioxide emissions annually. According to EIA, buildings use 39% of total US energy consumption in 2019, in which heating and cooling consume the most energy in this sector. Therefore, in order to reach a sustainable future, the built environment must be, not could be, must be created with a green design approach. From a sustainability perspective, green buildings incorporate considerations for the environment, economy, and society. They use natural resources to minimize carbon footprint, reduce water usage and energy consumption to minimize operational costs, and also improve indoor air quality to provide a safe and comfort environment for occupants. Green buildings also contribute to other SDGs, particularly goals 3, 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, 13, 15, and 17. Not only by saving water and energy efficiency, waste management and recycling, carbon emission and air pollution reduction, also by promoting education, creating job opportunities, enhancing community resilience and urban life quality, and much, much more. For instance, green buildings are designed with a high energy efficiency approach to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to minimize air pollution and mitigate urban heat island effects. They also provide daylight and natural ventilation to improve indoor air quality and enhance health and well-being for occupants in alignment with the SDG 3. In addition, green buildings contribute to achieve goal 7, to ensure the access of affordable and clean energy for everyone all over the world. Green buildings are designed to use on-site and off-site renewable energies such as solar, wind, geothermal, and the like to provide natural light, heating, cooling, and ventilation for interior spaces, which are cheaper than fossil fuels in long-term operation. Studies have shown that renewable sources of power are more affordable than carbon-based electricity in 2/3 of the world. They also produce no carbon emissions, which minimize the negative impacts on the environment and human health. And today, net zero energy buildings go even further toward a sustainable future by creating no waste as well as producing more energy output than input. They use high performance and green building technologies such as photovoltaic solar panels, wind turbines, thermal collectors, geothermal heat pumps, and the like to convert renewable energies into electricity. A well-designed net zero building with on-site renewable energy can produce the same amount or even more energy than it consumes on an annual basis. Therefore, green buildings can be considered as a great opportunity in supporting the SDG 9 that focuses on industry, innovation, and infrastructure. Today, more and more people are joining the green movement, resulting in a higher demand for sustainable buildings design. Sustainability starts at home. However, not enough people are aware of the amount of energy and resources consumed by buildings, the amount of greenhouse gases they release, and there are so many simple methods and technologies available to design and construct green buildings. Therefore, education plays a key role to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And it's our responsibility in higher education to address the general public's lack of knowledge about green buildings, to train future generations and professionals and leaderships, not only on the theory, also on the skills to help achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. If more people are informed, the concept will be better promoted and more widely used. As sustainability starts from our home, it's clear how concerned is the local government and authorities about residents' energy consumption habits, and how strongly it's pushing for energy conservation and efficiency efforts in this country. As part of Sony PIF Project 264, in collaboration with Sony Poly and ESF, we at Sony Oneonta have offered our first 5 interdisciplinary online courses on sustainable design to help students from diverse backgrounds to understand the concept of green buildings, sustainable neighborhoods and communities, and eco-cities to apply in their own projects and living, moving from consumers to creators, and contribute to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals for a sustainable future. I try to keep it in 10 minutes. Thank you very much. And if you are interested about the courses that we offered in Department of Geography and Environmental Sustainability, please contact me or Rachel for more information. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This is all very interesting and things that, some of the things I haven't thought about either. So this is a great event. The next presenter is Wendy Lascell for SDG 13 Climate Action.
Hi, everybody. Wendy Lascell. Thank you for the introduction. I am in the Department of Geography and Environmental Sustainability. And it's really interesting because the goal that I've been assigned, climate action, I actually talked to Rachel about this because I definitely do climate action, but it's not I do so much in so many of the goals that it's really hard to pick which one is most important. But I'll answer a couple of the questions first. How I became passionate over the years. When I was growing up, my family, my parents in particular, were about taking action. From taking me to no nukes rallies in lower Manhattan to volunteering at the hospital or the animal shelter or whatever. So I kind of developed this underlying drive to help. So I always want to help. So one of the goals that actually really resonates with me is the peace and justice. I think it's number 16. That's really one of the underlying driving forces behind what I like to do. And I incorporate many of these in my classes, in my work, and also in my personal time when I volunteer for nonprofits, because I'm really interested in helping advance these sorts of things. So I guess I'm going to skip a couple of those questions because they're too hard to answer. What's the most important one? I can't answer that. So I'm going to skip that question. But what I would like to tell everybody about is the work that I do with a nonprofit in New Orleans. So, and it's interesting, Rebecca mentioned the Action Hero t-shirts. I bring groups of students down there to volunteer, and we wore those shirts one year when we went on our trip. And we actually ended up having really interesting conversations with other volunteers, and people actually did have a problem with that word hero. But it resulted in some really great conversations that I think the students really benefited from. Anyway, side note. So I've been working with a nonprofit called Common Ground Collective or Common Ground Relief down in New Orleans since 2006. They formed right after Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. And they formed as a grassroots organization that really was about helping the people get through this disaster. And so they did things like helping them with mucking out houses and figuring out insurance and, you know, all sorts of things, navigating the complexities of dealing with a disaster. But they morphed into a permanent community organization where now they're doing climate action. most recently doing wetlands restoration to help prevent flooding in the future, right? So from these massive flood events or sea level rise, these sorts of, things. But most recently, because of COVID, they haven't had to, they haven't been able to bring down volunteers, because typically they get college groups from all over the country coming in and helping them with the tasks. They haven't been able to do that. So they focused on local volunteers and they created a new food bank. And that's been their mission through the pandemic. So it's a really great organization. And my students, I try to take a trip every year. It doesn't always work, but I try to take one trip with my students and one trip on my own. And the sorts of things that this nonprofit does to take action, it's really related to many of the goals, include things like the wetlands restoration, where the students actually, I can't do it because of physical limitations, but they actually go out in the muck of the wetlands and they're, neck deep in the muck and the mud, and they're planting grasses to try to restore the health of the wetlands. And they're making progress, but it's really challenging work to make progress. It's slow going. They have done projects in the local prisons, teaching, where volunteers go in to teach them how to garden or teach them different skill sets for when they're released. They also have a project where they provide temporary housing for newly released specifically male convicts, ex-convicts at that point, because one of the problems is that cycle that develops when you come out of jail and you can't find housing, you can't find a job. So they have these temporary housing locations, and you can stay there for a while. They help you with job placement and this sort of thing. So all sorts of different projects. One of my favorite things that they do is they help this local population group known as the Huma. It's a mix of Native American and Spanish population group that live in the wetlands, like south of New Orleans. And we have gone and helped them trying to restore their land. And it's fascinating work to work with these population groups that we never would be exposed to otherwise. And I'm actually going to put a link in the chat later when I'm done talking to a woman whose name is Monique Verdin. She grew up Huma, and she now lives in New Orleans, or maybe she's moved by now. But we've met her a couple times, and I kind of feel like she's a celebrity to me now because she's done so much work, and she's produced documentaries, and she does speaking engagements, and she's super interesting. So I'm going to put a link to her if you're interested in learning. Her documentary is called My Louisiana Love, and it's a beautiful documentary. I believe it's available for free on PBS. So this organization is a really good example of what I do on a regular basis that involves the SDGs, kind of going and taking action and trying to make change, but also showing my students and learning myself that it's not easy, that it's not simple, and you can't be a white knight that comes in and swoops in to fix something. You have to work with a community to meet goals. And that's, if my students come out of my disaster geography class with nothing else, I hope they remember that you can't just do, you have to work with the community from a grassroots perspective. My students have also created a series of short videos showcasing the work that they've done. I'll put a link to that as well. It's on my website. I have them all linked there. They're really kind of cool to have the students give their perspective of what they've learned and what they've done. So that's pretty cool. I know we're kind of, time is an issue. I think I have technically 1 minute left. So I'll just say that if you want to get involved, go volunteer. From a food bank to, Common Ground Collective, you can sign up and go yourself. You don't have to go with a class to go down to New Orleans and help. One of the latest things they've done is they're working with another nonprofit to restore the iris vegetation, the flowers, the iris in the Louisiana wetlands, which is kind of cool. Just something interesting that they just added. Okay, I'll stop there. I'm out of time. Thank you for listening.
Thanks so much. And last but not least, Florian Reyda for the SDG 15 Life on Land.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here this morning. This is an interesting topic for me. I'm Florian Reyda. I'm from the biology department where I teach, and I also spend half my time where I'm currently located. You see me sitting here in a laboratory at the biological field station, which is located on Otsego Lake. The lake is just right out this window here. So I'm actually an aquatic biologist who focuses on fish parasites. But I've been asked to talk to you today about the SDG, the goal number 15, life on land. So I do want to share some things for you there. And I'll go in order, and I'll be brief so that there's time for questions for any of the speakers. I believe we want to do that. So just how did I become passionate about life on land? Well, as I said, I am a biologist, and like many biologists, I got interested in biology as a child. I have a scar on my forearm when I fell on a glass jar because I was collecting fireflies, okay, and that kind of thing. And then later on collecting dragonflies and going fishing. I grew up in a rural setting in Nebraska, and so that's kind of where I learned about land ethic and taking care of the land and this sort of thing. But I do want to share a couple images with you of some other just kind of brief moment here about how I got into some of this stuff. If I can share the screen here. What I want to show you is a couple photos. So as a college student, I went to Peru as part of an interdisciplinary trip that spent 3 months in South America. And I was the student who got to see first the jaguar in the rainforest in Peru. And that moment changed my life. And here's a picture of another jaguar that I got to see later on when I was on a trip with another SUNY professor with SUNY students as a field biology course that is supported by Denise's office. So I wanted to point that out. So seeing this cat in the wild really did change my life. From Nebraska farmland, I knew that humans have the capacity to utterly transform the landscape on the one hand, but on the other hand, to see something like this cat in the wild reminded me that there's still a lot of potential for the wild to exist, and the excitement that I eventually was able to share with students to go to these sort of places. And then later on, fast forwarding several years, my wife, Laura Reyda, and I bought a chunk of Peruvian rainforest. And then later she took action and created a nonprofit organization who includes among its board of directors the previous speaker, Dr. Lascell, who has tirelessly served Project Buena Vista. And maybe as a little more service, Wendy, if you could type in the chat for me the URL, projectbuenavista.org. I can't use the chat, or my Teams goes away or does something funny. So I'll just leave that image there. And I want to mention that this is a nonprofit organization that's based out of a small piece of land, just 100 acres. And there's really two arms to the organization. One is environmental education, And I have been involved with that directly by bringing SUNY Oneonta students there and some other people there as well. But then the other half, and I would say that the more significant half, is my wife's medical outreach program. She's an acupuncturist who has done pro bono work in the local villages in the Peruvian Rainforest Park area that is Manu, where this land is positioned, for nearly 10 years. And she has been responsible for thousands of treatments of local people using acupuncture and Chinese herbs, and brought with her volunteers, including Dr. Lascell, who did a piece on medical geography at one point there. So this is an environmental organization. I think it's a good example of how interdisciplinary does help get the job done, because when we went into this, we didn't really see the connection between medical outreach and conservation. But the fact is that if people have better health, they are more able to have a land ethic and take care of their land. And so that's, to me, how this fits. So as I said, I'm an aquatic focused biologist, but this is the rainforest, and it's a fascinating ecosystem, and as you know, it's under great threat. And so I had to mention that. What about this topic or sustainable development goal do I think everyone should know? Well, you know, I grew up with a couple college professor parents and watched nature as a kid and all that kind of thing. And then last week I saw David Attenborough's documentary on extinction, and it really made me emotional. And I guess the bottom line is, we're getting away now from needing to simply say it's good for the planet to conserve land. Let's be kind to these other species to conserve land. I don't think you necessarily have to use an altruistic argument anymore, though it's suitable in a lot of cases. But you can use a more practical argument, and that is for our own survival as a species. If we keep doing things the way we are doing them now as a species, it's going to get in the way of our own survival. And so there's a practical side to conservation, in that it is affecting our health globally already. You know, the analogy of you know, not being able to breathe last year, George Floyd, COVID, the lungs of the earth being deforested by this leader of Brazil and what he facilitates. There's a lot of connections between environmentalism and simply human health. And of course, as Dr. Durkin talked about the economic side of it, you can make those arguments to your neighbors who are not environmentalists and might not agree that you know, a prairie dog needs to be protected. You can talk about it from their own sake of survival. And that's kind of the tact that I've seen David Attenborough turn towards as well as we go through these decades. As far as intersecting with other goals, you know, life on land it's a big topic. It intersects with all the other goals. And as I said, I'm an aquatic biologist by discipline. And so, you know, if we destroy our hemlocks on the shores of northeastern water bodies because there's an invasive caterpillar, the woody adelgid, or invasive insect coming in and destroying these hemlocks, if those trees, those plants die, you have erosion. That's going to affect those water bodies. Okay, so there is a connection between the forest and the land. And so I would say, you know, life on land, that directly links to life below water, and it also directly links to clean water and sanitation. If we pollute our forest, that runoff is going to go into the village water supply. Oneonta water is just right up the road from SUNY Oneonta. That's our drinking water. Okay, so I know people have to get going. I would say, as far as action to take, don't be afraid of taking small actions. It can be overwhelming. Join an environmental organization. Have a conversation with your neighbor. Learn about the political candidates and vote accordingly. Okay, these are small actions, but they do add up. And the last thing I would say is pay it forward. Maybe you like to take walks in the woods and you're already, you know, thinking about environmentalism. Take someone who's basically never been outside before and take them along the next time you do that walk. And I think I'll leave it right there. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, you can really see how, again, all of these SDGs intersect with each other. There are really none that don't. If anybody has any questions or comments, feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. I know some people might have to go, but if anybody else wants to say anything, feel free.
Hi, Denise. This is Reese Allen, and I just wanted to say thank you for everyone's comments. I did want to add a couple of things to what Barbara was saying. My dad is a farmer, and in the last 10 years, I've really seen that Internet of Things showing up in his farming. And he's pulling out these reports and graphs, and they are able to link the equipment with GIS data, with GPS. So the tractor will actually drive itself pretty much. They've had soil content things done on the field so that as the tractor goes, it will change the amount of fertilizer. And until you said what you were talking about today, I did not connect that to sustainability. You know, my first thing was like, oh, well, that's purely economic. You know, we're just cutting down on the cost of fertilizer. And then, you know, in this context, through this lens, it's like, oh, it's clearly sustainable. So, and then also in apparel production, we still do time studies. You know, we are looking at cutting down seconds off of operations. So this idea of using wearables, you know, a lot of the countries where that occurs, they are developing countries. But it would be interesting, you know, as that production does start to move back into the US, you know, I think we will see some reshoring and some nearshoring happening. So wonderful. Thank you so much.
I think there's another question for Barbara. Yeah, Farzaneh, do you want to? I can read it, or you can say it. Either one. So, what do you think about the integration of the concept of urban farm into the green roofs design, particularly in high-dense cities like New York, to mitigate the heat island impacts and consequently the climate change?
You know, Farzaneh, I'm so glad you asked that question because one of my close friends is involved in exactly that kind of stuff. So I feel like I'm like elbow deep in it and I love it. I think it makes total sense. I think it makes total sense. I think there's a cost and benefit that comes with it as we see more and more people during the pandemic trying to have little urban gardens. You know, I think it's just how do we best use the land? Florian mentioned, how do we best use the land? And we have all this space and the amount of macadam, the amount of pavement that just makes such a difference in the climate in New York City. I mean, you go through the canyons of New York City and you can feel the temperature change. So the idea of having urban farms, I think, is so exciting. It's so exciting. And I would love to talk with you more about it and connect you to my friend Yolanda.
It's my pleasure. You know, particularly in compact cities, you know, and mega cities like New York, LA, or something like that, that we don't have enough open spaces between buildings. So the only space that we have to, you know, apply or to design some green spaces are roofs. So yeah, thank you very much. Thank you so much because it's your expertise, and I would like to know how we can.
Yes, I'll put the two of us together.
Thank you very much.
Great. Yeah, if anybody else has any other questions, you can also feel free to contact each other. Thank you all so much for participating in this event. We have 2 other events coming up as well for the series, so we're excited about that. But thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dennis.
Fun.
Thanks,
all.
thanks to the other